So, so we've got like, where are the boundaries of, because traditionally some of this was done. You mentioned Bell Labs, and there's other famous examples of private corporate funded fundamental research. And then I know a fair amount is done by universities and governments. Like, where are the boundaries of different efforts that are taking place, and why did you feel that like a new
that we
form was
need a new.
necessary?
Why do we
Yeah.
need new institutions? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, this is not a landscape I'm familiar with. So I'm fascinated with like the opportunity that you saw.
Yeah. So let me, the way that I'll sort of describe it is, to a large extent, the existing institutions and the constraints that they're under, and sort of paint in what the gap that we're trying to fill, sort of like by painting in the negative space, if you will. So I'm sure all of your listeners are very familiar with startups. They are an amazing vehicle for building and scaling technology. The trick is that startups, one, are usually under intense time constraints just because of investors' timescales, and also the work that you want to do, like to really like grow, like sort of do this exponential growth, is different than the work that you want to do to like do research to figure stuff out. Because like sort of research very often looks like nothing, 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 something, nothing, something, something, right? So, which is just not great for like raising a Series A, raising a Series B. And then there's also just a different mindset that you need when you're doing like technology research versus building a technology product. So that's sort of like where things are like, so stuff that's too researchy to be a startup. Corporate labs, unfortunately, have for the most part been gutted by call it like shareholder activism or compressed timescales or decreased margins. But if you look at it, there are many corporate research labs, but they're much more tied to the product lines, existing product lines of a company. So they either have like contracts from operating units to go in and be like, okay, like make this product line a little bit better. Or they actually have to get their funding from like external contracts, right? So half the funding for many corporate research labs now comes from government grants. And so they really don't have the ability to sort of do this like exploratory, speculative, ambitious work. And then that sort of brings us to government funding, which, so, I mean, there are national labs that do research, but like for the most part, we think of the government as actually funding research in other institutions, right? So whether they're funding startups or universities or like contract research organizations, and with the government, there's kind of this fundamental tension, and maybe you're even seeing a little bit of this in the DOGE discussions that are currently happening, where as citizens in a democracy, we want the government to be responsible with our money, right? Like we pay taxes, we want the government to spend that money responsibly. At the same time, in order to do really ambitious, amazing research, you need to be a little bit irresponsible. Like you can't, like you actually can't go through and say like, yes, I can justify this step and this step and this step.
It's the same issue with it's the same sort of power law, like incremental progress issue that you run into on the investor side. It's always having to justify. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so, right, like, and this is in large part one of the amazing things about venture capital is that like there are people who will just be like they'll take a flyer. They'll be like, oh, like, like this seems insane. I'll go for it.
That's my mantra, baby. That's it is actually
right?
a frustration that I have with a lot of venture capitalists is like, especially when it's a deeply like technological breakthrough kind of company where no one's ever built the thing before, but the theory is that it can be built, or the science shows that it can be built. And the whole company is really, can it be built or can it not? And nobody on earth knows because it's never been built before. And so it's a really like investors are like, well, I don't know how to diligence this. It's like the price is the diligence. The risk is the diligence. Like that's the bet.
So the government is much more like, like a PE firm or something, right? And so there are just many things. I mean, and then like we can go through the whole like litany of things like it moves slowly, it requires you to be part of an existing institution, it's very like, XYZ. And then I think the sort of last player that I will bring us to is sort of academia as uh exemplified by universities. There are many sort of like non-university like research organizations, but they're still sort of under the broad institutional header of academia. And the issue there, I guess there's sort of two categories of issues. There are the universities themselves as institutions have accumulated at this point dozens of roles over the past several hundred years, right? Like Mark Andreessen has talked about this, where it's like the university is both like a place for 18 to 22-year-olds to like hang out, get like do job training, do moral instruction, be a dating app, be a credentialing agency, be a hedge fund, a sports team, right? And discover the secrets of the universe and build useful technology, right? Like all of these things have been lumped into one. And the fact of the matter is that they're just one, they're stopped being good at many of them. And then and I would argue that they are especially bad at creating useful technology, even though that is sort of the paradigm that has been sort of like incepted into us. Shockingly, relatively recently, the historian fun fact is that this idea that the way that technology happens by spinning out of a lab is actually was basically invented in the late 1970s. Before that, there was that was not the paradigm of like universities as innovation engines. So there's like universities as this like and universities have also become the most bureaucratic institution in existence, like, and I include the federal government in that statement. And then there's sort of like this broader philosophical mismatch between the academic, what I would call like an academic mindset, and building technology, and where the like academic mindset at the end of the day is this kind of like it is the descendant of natural philosophy, where you're really trying to like the sort of the game is to discover the truth of the universe and come up with new ideas and discover new things, which is great and great and wonderful, but does not lend itself to actually building useful technology. Because I'm sure you've seen this in investing, where you talk to a technologist and they're like, this is new, this is like totally new, no one's ever done it before. And you're like, yeah, but like, does it do the thing better? And they're like, not really, right? Because the metric in academia is novelty. So anyway, that is a very long way of saying, so what we're focused on is doing, like, our boundaries are like stuff that doesn't have a home in these other institutions, is weird, needs to move fast, and needs to be like focused on building useful technologies that can scale and get out into the world.